Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Ryan Wohl podcast. I'm Ryan Wohl. I recently graduated from the University of Arizona with a degree in journalism, and this is my first episode of my podcast. Each week, I'll be here discussing all of the news around the sports world, from the NBA to the NFL to UFC and even WWE. So we'll be here each and every week breaking it all down. The video form of the podcast will be available on my YouTube, Ryan Wohl. You can subscribe and like this right now. That is greatly appreciated. And you can download the podcast on all podcast platforms wherever you normally listen. It will be there each and every time. But to open the first episode here today, I wanted to start in the world of pro wrestling because on Saturday night, we saw one of the biggest returns in WWE history, the return of CM Punk, one that many thought would never happen. Even myself, for many years, I wished to hear those famous words from his theme song, The Cult of Personality, but it seemed like that was never going to happen. He was gone for almost 10 years. Just over 3,500 days. He did, as we know, make his return to professional wrestling in a different company. He returned to AEW. For 2 years he was there. He had a backstage brawl type incident with the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, we know about that. And just at the end of August, at the All In pay-per-view they had at Wembley Stadium, was a gigantic success. Huge show. Great show. CM Punk had his final match in AEW against Samoa Joe, and he had an altercation with Jungle Boy Jack Perry in the locker room. Later, AEW decided to fire and part ways with CM Punk. To me, that was a massive bad choice for Tony Khan, just because CM Punk is not just a great wrestler, which he is, we'll get to that, but he's one of the biggest stars, not only just in wrestling today, but in pro wrestling history. And when the Cult of Personality played on Saturday night, the Allstate Arena in the outstrips of Chicago, Illinois, his hometown, went crazy, and truly, to me, was the biggest return and pop of an entrance I've ever seen during my lifetime of watching professional wrestling. And there's no better time to return than right now, because right now we're on the road to WrestleMania. We're just about 4 months away. The Royal Rumble's in less than 2 months. That officially starts the road to WrestleMania. But it seems like with CM Punk back, it seems like right now the road to WrestleMania officially starts. And it's not just any WrestleMania. This year, it's in my hometown, of course, which is great, and it's going to be tremendous. But this is the 40th anniversary of WrestleMania. So you know Triple H and the WWE will pull out all the stops, will bring back legends and everyone they need to make this a massive success of a show. And there's just so many feuds and people that CM Punk could wrestle. You know, he has the beef with Seth Rollins already. He has that history. The history with Paul Heyman is there so he can feud with Roman Reigns down the line. And there's just so many others. But CM Punk, on his first promo on Monday Night Raw, he said, "Hell froze over." And those are the words that Bret Hart used about 2 decades ago when he made his return to Monday Night Raw after he had a falling out with Vince and the WWE after the screw job. But all in all, was a fantastic return to pro wrestling and to the WWE for CM Punk, the biggest star right now. Roman Reigns is over. He's the longest reigning champ, but he does not have that type of pop that CM Punk does when Punk makes his entrance. But moving on, I wanted to get to the NFL today because it's crazy. We're already 12 plus weeks in, but we're entering week 13. And after last week, to me, Jalen Hurts separated himself from the pack to win the NFL MVP. Last year, before he got injured towards the end of the season, around this time, he was on track to win last year's MVP, but he did get hurt, and it was a shame. But this year, to me, Hurts is the MVP. The Eagles aren't just the best team in the league. They're the best team by 2 games. They now moved to 10-1 after Hurts had 5 touchdowns, leading them to a 37-34 victory over the Bills this past Sunday. It wasn't, a pretty win, but a win's a win, and you just got to keep stacking the wins. And in this league, it's just simply hard to win at the rate that the Eagles have done, not just this season, but dating back to last season. Jalen Hurts has he's only lost 3 games as a starter, and just some of his numbers are incredible. He has 29 total touchdowns. That's second in the NFL, and his yards are 7th. That's rushing and passing. His QBR is 6th, and his completion percentage is 10th. It's not the best, but it's still pretty good, and Hurts continues to get better, to play through the injury of his knee that people thought, he tweaked a couple weeks ago, but this was his best game. 5 touchdowns, made big plays, had, of course, the game-winning touchdown in overtime against the Bills when the Eagles needed him most, and always when the Eagles need Hurts most. He steps up to the plate. He's one of the most clutch, not just quarterbacks, but players I've seen in recent memory in sports. So I think the MVP is Hurts to lose right now. If I had to make a top 3, my second guy in contention right now is the team that the Eagles will face this Sunday. Huge rematch of the NFC Championship a year ago. That's Brock Purdy. By the advanced statistics, he is just dominating and looks really good. He's number 1 in QBR, passer rating he's number 1, and he's number 1 in completion percentage. He doesn't have the most touchdowns, only 21 to Hurts' 29. That's good for 6th in the NFL, but he really is just orchestrating an elite offense down there in San Francisco, and they have a great defense, but Purdy's ability to manage the offense and the way he's leading them, that makes this Niners team have a chance to get to the next level, because last year, as we know, when he got hurt, they went through a bunch of different quarterbacks. They couldn't get on the right footing, but with Purdy under center, with McCaffrey, who has 16 touchdowns this year, they are very, very scary. And to me, the winner of this year's Super Bowl will come from the NFC, as you have so many dominant teams. But besides the Eagles, the other teams in my top 5, I have the Ravens. They're 9-3. Lamar Jackson looks really good. Hasn't thrown for many touchdowns, but he's kind of like Purdy. He's running the offense and establishing the run early and often with Gus Edwards. He is a monster, and he's really just running the offense that Harbaugh needs them to do. And Baltimore's defense has looked a lot better than they have in the past. They're coming off of a 20-10 victory over the Chargers this past week. And following them, I have the Chiefs and Dolphins. The Chiefs beat them a couple weeks ago in an international series. But this past week, the Chiefs were down by 2 touchdowns early on to the Raiders. They bounced back in this game. The Dolphins had a big 34-13 victory over the New York Jets. That was the first game in history on Black Friday that was in New York. And Raheem Mostert had 2 touchdowns in that game. Tua, which did surprise me, he did throw 2 interceptions. He hasn't thrown many this year, so when he turns it over, it kind of is a surprise. And the Dolphins, they've been up and down when they face better competition. They've struggled in the NFL this season, but I really think that with their offense, their defense continues to improve, I think the Dolphins are a real threat here down the stretch. But moving on, it's one of the best weekends in college football. It's championship weekend. The conference championships are this weekend. And this year, more than any year, there's a legit 8 teams in contention to make the 14 playoff that will be decided this Sunday, the day after the regular season and conference championship weekend concludes. But a few of the ones that I'm looking forward to, and the matchup that everyone has been looking forward to, is number 5 Oregon versus number 3 Washington. It's in the Pac-12 championship, the last Pac-12 championship of the version of this Pac-12 that we know it. There's only going to be 2 teams after this year. We don't know how that's going to continue. But to me, I'm just really surprised that Oregon is a 10-point favorite. You know, Washington is the team that's 12-0. They're the team that's undefeated. They've had some close games the past few weeks, but everyone thought they were going to lose against Oregon State 2 weeks ago. They bounced back. They beat them, and they just continue to run. Michael Penix is just an elite quarterback, one of the best in the country. To me, he's top probably 3 in the Heisman voting this year. I think Jalen Daniels should get the nod there. I know his team hasn't been as good this year, but they've been in a lot of shootouts, and Jalen Daniels is even topping the total yards and touchdowns that Joe Burrow set when he had his historic run at LSU when they won the national championship years ago. But getting back to the games, I think Washington is definitely going to keep it under the 10 points. And I think Washington is going to upset Oregon in this game. I think they did pull out the win earlier in the season when they played. I know that was a close one. Oregon has been dominating teams here during the last couple of weeks, but I think people are sleeping on Washington. Their offense is elite. They have a couple elite receivers with Michael Penix, and their defense, they haven't let up that many points as they did earlier in the season. They're much improved, and I think if they can keep Oregon, even under 35 points, that would be a win, because Oregon's offense, Bo Nix, he's another favorite and front runner for the Heisman this year. He's been just incredible this season. The second biggest conference championship game to me is number 1 Georgia versus number 8 Alabama. Alabama pulled out a last-second crazy touchdown last week in the Iron Bowl to beat Auburn. It was just unbelievable. Jalen Milroe took the snap, faded, went to the right, ran to the left, and found the receiver in the end zone to end that game at the buzzer to win that, kept their playoff hopes alive. And they're another one. The line is 5.5, favoring Georgia. I think Alabama's going to cover that line. I think Alabama is going to win. I think this Georgia team's good, but I don't think this is one of their better Georgia teams. But they haven't lost a game in over 2 years. They're on one of the best runs in college football history. And I just don't think that this Georgia team can stop Alabama long enough, because Jalen Milroe is really hot right now. He's on a good stretch, and I think if he rides that hot hand, I really think that Alabama can get the job done. Then we got number 7 Texas against number 18 Oklahoma State. Texas is a 15.5-point favorite. And then number 4 Florida State versus number 14 Louisville. That's in the ACC championship. Florida State's only a 2-point favorite. That's after, of course, they've lost then Heisman contender Jordan Travis. He was having an excellent season. Real shame for them, because they're another team like Washington. They lost their quarterback, of course, but they're getting disrespected. And to me, they still deserve a spot in the playoff if they win. I know that the circumstances are what they are, and I'm kind of playing both sides, but like, you can't have a team in the playoff when you know it's going to be a blowout. They're playing with their backup quarterback, but on the other hand, they beat everyone that was in front of them, and then they've won a couple games without Jordan Travis. They've proven they can win, and in reality, he is the most important player on the team, Travis was, but he still was one guy out of, you know, each down there's 11 guys on the field, and it's just taking away from everyone else that put a valuable effort out to make the team successful. And I think Michigan's going to win. I think they're the only true lock this weekend. The other three teams, this is how I look at it. The winner of the Pac-12's in. That's two teams in. The final two, the winner of the SEC should be in. If it's Georgia, they're obviously in. They'll be the number one seed most likely. But even if Alabama pulls up that upset like I just predicted, there has to be a spot for Alabama in the playoff. If you beat number one Georgia, that's the best victory this season in college football. I think Texas is going to win the Big 12 championship too, and they do deserve a slot, but it's all going to depend if FSU loses. If FSU loses, I think Texas and Bama wins if Bama beats Georgia. But this is just a really tricky situation because Texas did beat Alabama earlier in the season, and if they win their conference championship, it's hard to leave them out and put Bama in. But we've seen it happen in the past. Weird things happen. It's all about when you play in college football. So I think it's just great because it's the first time that I can remember during this 4-team college football playoff era. We're going into conference championship weekend. There's so many different outcomes. I believe there's at least 16 different outcomes that could happen because, like I said, there's 8 teams legitimately still in. Even if Georgia loses to Alabama, if they lose a close one, there's still a chance that people could want to put them in because they're coming off, like I said, 2 straight national championships, and they've proven that they're basically, if they would win this year, I consider it a dynasty, but they're knocking on that doorstep. So yeah, I think that 4th spot is going to come down to Florida State and Texas. That's if Alabama wins, and I think that's a very possible chance that Alabama gets the job done. But we'll see. This is going to be a great sports weekend. That is crazy because if Alabama gets the job done, then it's really going to reestablish their season as a success because earlier in the season, a lot of people thought that, oh, Nick Saban's done. He lost the step. You know, they lost the game early to Texas, but if they're back, that is really good for the college landscape. But moving on, and I wanted to talk about the UFC because this weekend, it's UFC. It's a fight night. It's in Austin, Texas, and it's a great one there in Austin. The main event, it's Arman Suzukian taking on Beneil Dariush. The co-main event is Bobby King Green. He was supposed to take on Dan Hooker, but now he is taking on Jalen Turner. He's a late replacement, but still 2 great fights in the lightweight division. Dariush, as we know, is coming off of a loss to Charles do Bronx Oliveira just a couple months ago, but I think he's going to get back and establish his winning ways. You know, before that, I believe he won 9 straight fights. He was dominant for a long period of time, and I think with a win here, he puts himself back in that top 3 to 4 contenders in the lightweight division, depending on what Chandler and Connor do later this year, hopefully. But in that co-main event, I think Bobby Green is just riding a high that we haven't seen in quite some time. He's coming off of a huge victory against Grant Dawson just a couple months ago, and he was a heavy underdog in that fight. This fight's different. I was really looking forward to seeing what was supposed to be a 5-round fight between him and Dan Hooker, but we're not going to get that. I think this is a fight where we could see Bobby Green get his 3rd straight win in. If Bobby Green beats Jalen Turner, a top 12 opponent, I think Bobby Green is knocking on the doorstep of a title shot. I don't think yet, but he's a guy where if he wins another fight or 2, he could get a title shot. And it's just great to see. Bobby's always interesting, always entertaining when he's out there. Moving on, rounding out this fight night in Austin, Texas, on a Saturday night, it is Rob Font taking on Davison Figueiredo, former UFC flyweight champion in his debut at 135 pounds. And the line is really close. Rob Font's minus 130. He's the favorite. Figueiredo plus 110. He hasn't fought since the beginning of this year when he lost that fight in the fourth fight against Brandon Moreno. So he's moving up and taking on a Rob Font who is coming off of a loss. He lost a couple months ago in quite of a boring fight, if I may say so myself, to Corey Sandhagen. But Rob Font does move into bantamweight as a smaller bantamweight in this division. He's 3 inches shorter than Rob Font. Font also has a 3.5 reach advantage. But I'm going to go with Figueiredo in this fight. I know he's the underdog, but I just believe in his striking. I believe in his will to win. He's a former champion. I know he's moving up. He's fighting a tough guy, a veteran of this UFC 135-pound division in Font. But I think Figueiredo is going to get the job done. He's proven that when the odds are stacked against him, he can overcome them. And yeah, I think he's going to get this win. The fourth fight on this card from the top that is a really interesting one is the return of Sean Brady. We haven't seen Sean Brady since he got knocked out by Bilal Muhammad back in October. So over a year ago, that's when he's lost his first fight. He's taking on Kelvin Gastelum, who's moving down to welterweight for the first time in a couple years. He is coming off of a win just a couple months ago when he made his 2+ year return. Gastelum's the plus 100 underdog to Sean Brady's minus 120 favorite in this fight. Brady has a 1 inch advantage in height and a 1 inch advantage in the reach department. This is a really good fight. This should be a 3-round war. I think this is going to go the distance. It's just both need a win to move themselves up, because in Brady's point, if he gets another win, if he gets a win over Gaslam, a former title challenger a couple years ago, he is inching closer to getting a title shot, reestablishing his winning ways. But Calvin Gaslam is 32 and he's getting older and he's moving down, which you don't see a lot when people age. But if he gets a win here, that could be huge to, start a run as a contender at 170 pounds. So yeah, if I had to pick here, I would go with Sean Brady. He's the younger fighter by only by a year, but he hasn't fought in over a year. He's been, training in Philly, been working, getting better. So I'm gonna go with him. I think he's a more technical striker. But if it does go the distance, it could favor Gaslam because he has a gas tank there. But in the main event, as I mentioned before, Arman is a minus 300 favorite to a plus 245 Beneil Dariush. Jalen Turner's minus 210. He's the favorite over a plus 175 Bobby Green. My picks for those, starting at the top, I think Beneil Dariush is going to get the job done. He won 9 fights before he got knocked out by Oliveira, but he's another guy. He always gets doubted, always gets counted out, and he's not the most technical, but he just always seems like he does enough to win. So yeah, I think he's going to pull off the upset and really put himself in that top 3 in the lightweight division. The other lightweight fight in the co-main event, Jalen Turner, Bobby Green. It's a big mismatch in height. Jalen Turner has 5 inches over Bobby Green. I think Jalen Turner is going to win this fight. He's coming off of a loss to Dan Hooker, who Bobby Green was supposed to fight in this fight. But Bobby Green is no slouch by any means. He always overcomes the odds. Kind of seems like the theme with a bunch of guys on this card, but this is a great card. It's in Austin, Texas, at the Moody Center where the University of Texas basketball team plays. So yeah, this should be a great card. A lot of great fights. And this one is an earlier start time here on the East Coast, 4 p.m. The prelims start on ESPN Plus, and then the main card is at 7 p.m. on ESPN. So yeah, this should be a great one. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching, viewing, liking, subscribing to the first episode of the Ryan Wohl podcast. We'll be here every week on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll see you next time.